our topic for today is a sucker for sin, a sucker for sin. And if we go in our Bibles here to James chapter 1, verse 12, it says, "Blessed is the man that endureth temptation. Blessed is the man that endureth temptation." It says, "For when he is tried, he shall receive a crown of life. But when he is tried, the person that has already endured the temptation, when he's tested, he shall receive a crown of life, which the Lord has promised to them that love him. Love him. Let no man say when he is tempted, I am tempted of God, for God cannot be tempted with evil, neither tempteth he any man. But every man is tempted," key point, "when he is drawn away of his own lust and enticed. And when lust is conceived, it bringeth forth sin. And when sin is finished, it bringeth forth death." So that's a forward motion of the process of sin. It starts out with that seed. It says you're drawn away of your own lust and enticed. And when lust has conceived, when it births, that seed of lust will birth sin. And when sin is finished, it manifests death. So we don't want to be suckered by sin, because if we're suckered by sin, we will find ourselves in a position where we could be devoured by the enemy, and we can end up not just spiritually dead, but also physically dead. People plant the seed for sin, and they put themselves in a dead situation, and they start to continue to feed the sin or habitually sin, and eventually it's too much for them to bear the weight of that sin on this earth realm, so they die. So you wouldn't want to deal with that. Now, sin's originator is Lucifer. Lucifer is the originator of sin. Now, again, the Bible is a progressive revelation, but the Bible, in its progression, discusses things at different times. You can look through the story of Cain and Abel, and then right after it tells that story, it starts to talk about how Adam and Eve birthed a son that started the process for the life that we live here now. I believe it was Seth. I said that to say, even though Isaiah 14 is in the Bible strategically placed after Genesis, it's actually talking about a lot of the events that took place before Adam and Eve fell to sin in Genesis. It's talking about the events that took place that caused Satan to be cast down to the earth. And when he was cast down to the earth, of course, he brought darkness and void with him. And then, as the Bible says in Genesis 1, God looked out and he saw darkness and void, and he spoke light. But that was facilitated through Satan being cast down, like Jesus said in Matthew's, like lightning. So he created a crash of darkness in a wonderful place. And some other things took place. We won't get into that. We start getting into creation and start talking about dinosaurs and different things like that. I'll explain some of that other stuff to you. But I said that to say the originator of Satan is Lucifer. Lucifer sinned. Lucifer started to think about I and rebelled. He had a responsibility. He was Lucifer. He was an archangel, or what we call a prince. And the princes were over, each of them had a third of the angels. You had Lucifer, who had the worshipers. You had Gabriel, had the messengers. Michael had the warriors. And so Lucifer decides, well, I could be equal with God. I'll ascend myself up with the Most High. He kept saying, you read through Isaiah 14, I. And again, so what he did was he took himself out of the boundaries of the presence of God, and he became lawless. So that's what's one of our definitions of sin. We'll talk about a few of them, is lawlessness. So it's without boundaries. You always hear me talk about the benefits of boundaries, not for prevention, but for protection. So a lot of times you think, even you think some of the rules that your parents have are for prevention, but it is for protection. It's to protect you, and it started way back when you were young, because something in you was so curious that you wanted to pull the whole socket out of the wall and really see how that thing worked, and you decided to use a pair of scissors to do it. Well, when they said stop, that was for protection. So the emphasis wasn't as much as prevention as for protection. Or we had them little gates that we put up. Well, the gates is to protect the child. That a gate is there to protect the child from tumbling down the stairs. All right, so that's the purpose of God's established what we will call laws. Laws are fixed principles. It's to protect us. Now, that sin nature entered into the earth realm through Lucifer or Satan, but Eve's being tricked, and just for the record, we're going to get into it through a sin of omission. Now, we'll get into it. We're going to go through all commission, omission, and some attitude sins, but omission was ignorance. That put her in a position where she offered the fruit to Adam, who sinned commission. He knew what he was doing. Right? He basically, one person slipped into sin, the other person jumped into sin. Right? So that's why Adam gets a lot of the weight. It says through one man's sin is what it says in the Bible. We all fell into sin just like one man's obedience. It doesn't say Eve because she slipped right into sin, right? So that's omission. So, and there's various types of sins, and we'll talk about a few. We may do this for a couple of weeks so we can really get into inequity and some other things. But fear is a sin. Fear is a sin. Nehemiah 6:10-14, it states, I was caused to fear and act in sin. I was caused to fear and act in sin. Not living a life of faith is sin. Something that we just take for granted. We decide whether we want to be faithful or not. But let's look at Romans 14. My wife always uses the passage, I believe it's in, it's either Corinthians or Ephesians, but be not ignorant of Satan's devices, his tricks. And then I think I shared this with you the other week. I think I forgot what we were talking about, but we talked about the 1 John 2, right? The lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. And I gave you three parallels. I gave you in Genesis, when you look through how Eve was tempted, you'll see the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life by her looking, and it was good for food, and she thought it would make one wise, So you'll see the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and pride of life. And then I gave you the temptation of Jesus in the wilderness in Matthew 4, when if you look at the turn the stone to bread and give you the world or cast yourself off of this cliff, you'll see again the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. So his devices have those three roots as their pillars. You will find wherever temptation that you're dealing with will fall under those three categories: the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. All right, so I gave you that already, so we don't have to do too much more with that. But I told you I wanted to give you this scripture just so you could meditate on it. Romans 14, I believe. Let me see if I can find this. Verse 23. It says, he that doubteth is damned, condemned, is what that says. Right? Interesting. It says, if he eat because, he that doubteth is damned if he eat because he eateth not of faith. And this was just talking about don't get so caught up in what you're going to eat is all blessed. But at the end, after the semicolon, it says, "For whatsoever is not of faith is sin." Whatsoever is not of faith is sin. Now, not taking that out of context, it's talking about, just the transition from the Levitical laws of what you should eat, the splitted hoof, and the different things of that, to the process that I think Peter went through in Acts 10. It's Acts 10. It talks about it again in Acts 11 is when he's explaining to his boys, like, no, I'm trying to tell you, I had a vision. But when God says, whatever I bless, you can eat. But it's saying, don't bind people up in, oh, you eating pork, you're going to hell. Don't get caught up into that. But it's saying that we should be living a life of faith in all the things we do. That's how we should flow, because what's not of faith is sin. Yeah, if you think about it, without faith it's impossible to please God. So we should be making decisions off of our communion with God and faith, not off of our fear of circumstances and man. All right? All right, so you hear some things, you'll hear some things throughout your life, and you probably already heard them. The 7 deadly sins, you've heard those. And now they're explained 2 different types of ways. So there's the Bible way of explaining them. And as we read them, you'll see they're not really, there's no such thing as deadly sins. From the standpoint of deadly, all sin leads to death. All right, so let's look at Proverbs 6. And now it might not be deadly, but it's important for us to understand how God views these sins. And so you're not, just like I said, what is not of faith is sin. You don't want to be suckered through the adversary speaking to your mind. What's the big deal? I mean, you might not just be wanting to use faith at this time. Why are we living for God if we won't live by faith? You see what I'm saying, right? Remember we talked about the just shall live by faith. So 16, and we'll start here, Proverbs 16. Is that right? No, Proverbs 6. I apologize, yeah. That's what I'm thinking about. Right, but I was in Proverbs 16. But, yeah, so Proverbs 6 is where I should have been. I was really talking about me. I'm sure you guys are where you're supposed to be. It says, these 6 things doth the Lord hate. Yea, 7 are abomination to him. A proud look and a lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood. A heart that deviseth wicked imaginations. That's you should highlight that, circle that. A heart that devises wicked imaginations. We'll be talking about that. Feet that be swift to running to mischief. A false witness, lying, basically, a misrepresentation, that speaketh lies, and he that soweth discord among the brethren causes division. Right? It says, my son, keep thy father's commandments. Right? And so you have basically haughty eyes, just off. Our eyes are the window to our soul, but we're using our eyes to I call it in basketball, something I tell the players, quick recognition. So quick recognition is you recognize the best opportunity to score as quick as possible. Because if I recognize if Lamar is my power forward and I got to get him the ball, I don't want him crossing over or nothing. I get him the ball where he can just catch it and lay it up. I got to recognize if he has an opportunity, because that's my opportunity to get him in the game. So if you're my jump shooter, I got to recognize when you're in position to take your shot. I can't see you and go, should I pass it? I might pass it. Then by the time I throw it, you got to reset and you might miss the shot. So I got to recognize